Arizona Territory, 1879. The wind kicked up red dirt across the churchyard as Rachel Finley stepped out of the chapel, her black skirts brushing the dry ground. The funeral crowd had already thinned, leaving behind whispers and sideways glances. She kept her chin high, even though her throat burned. She was 24 and already a widow. Her husband, Thomas, had died after a fall from a ladder during a storm 2 weeks earlier. Since then, the town of Dry Creek had turned colder than the desert night. Folks once polite now barely looked her in the eye. Some said Thomas's death was her fault. Others whispered about the land he left her, 20 acres just north of town. Land some men wanted. Rachel tightened her grip on her son's hand. Jesse, only 6, looked up at her, confused but quiet. She kept her other arm around her daughter, Josie, who was 4 and clung to her skirts like they were the only thing holding her to this earth. "Do not listen to them," Rachel said softly, brushing hair from Josie's face. "We will be all right." But she was not sure she believed it. The trouble started 3 days after the funeral. A man named Myron Tate, who owned the general store, came to her house with 2 others. They said Thomas owed him money and that the farm now belonged to them. "My husband never said anything about a debt," Rachel had said, standing in the doorway with Jessie behind her and Josie on her hip. Myron had smiled, the kind that did not reach his eyes. "Does not matter now, widow. You and your little ones best be gone by week's end." She slammed the door, heart pounding, but the warning stayed with her. Then came the threats. A chicken slaughtered and left on her porch. A fire started out by the barn and stomped out before it spread. Even the preacher stopped calling. Rachel tried to stay strong. She worked the land during the day, kept her children close, and prayed at night. But alone, she knew she could not hold the farm, not with the town turning against her. The help came unexpected. That afternoon, as she was fixing the fence behind the barn, she heard her son yell, "Mama, there's a man." She dropped the hammer and came running. Jesse stood near the road, pointing. A tall man sat quietly on a painted horse, watching the house from the hill. His face was set, unreadable. His long black hair was braided down his back, and he wore soft leather leggings and a woven sash across his chest. His rifle was strapped across his back but untouched. "Do not go near him," Rachel called, picking up Josie in her arms and grabbing Jesse's hand. The man did not move closer. He just watched. Then he turned his horse and rode off toward the trees. That night, she bolted the door and pushed the dresser in front of it. The man haunted her thoughts not just because of the danger, but because of the way he had looked at her. Calm, steady. Like he had seen trouble before and knew how to wait it out. The next morning, Rachel stepped outside to find her fence mended. The boards she had not finished the day before were now nailed straight and tight. She turned slow, scanning the land. No one in sight. A week passed, and the mysterious man kept appearing. Always at a distance, always watching, then leaving. On the 7th day, she found a rabbit gutted and cleaned, laid on her doorstep. She stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up and bringing it inside. That night, she cooked it and fed her children well for the first time in days. The next morning, she found a stack of chopped wood by the barn. Rachel was not a fool. She knew who was behind it. Still, when she saw him again, this time standing just outside the fence, hat in hand, her heart beat hard in her chest. "You need something?" she asked, holding Josie close. "No," he said. His voice was low, rough but gentle. "Just making sure you are not alone." She studied him. His face was lean, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of dust after rain. He looked 28, maybe 30. Not a boy, not a stranger to pain. "You Apache?" she asked. He nodded once. "Name is Gaelan Redhawk." She waited for fear to rise, But it did not. Instead, there was something else. A strange warmth. Steadying. "Why are you helping me?" He looked down at her children. "Because they should not see harm. And you have no one." Rachel hesitated, then nodded once and stepped back. "There is coffee inside." That was how it started. Gaelan came every morning after that. He never stayed long, just helped with what needed doing. Fixing the roof, carrying water, watching the tree line when Rachel worked the fields. Jesse followed him around like a shadow. Josie brought him flowers. And Rachel began to smile again. The town noticed. Whispers turned to stares. Then stares turned to threats. It happened on a Sunday. Rachel had taken the children to town for supplies. Gaelan stayed near the wagon, leaning against the wheel, arms folded. They were halfway out the mercantile when Myron Tate stepped in front of them. "You bringing that savage into town now?" he said loudly, looking at Gaelan. Rachel stood tall. "He is a good man. He has done more for my family than anyone in this town." "Your husband would be ashamed," one woman muttered. "You think we are going to let some red devil walk among us like he belongs?" Myron spat on the ground. Gaelan stepped forward, calm. "We are not looking for trouble." "Well, trouble found you," Myron said, pulling a pistol from his coat. Rachel froze. Jesse screamed. Gaelan moved faster than any man she had ever seen. He stood in front of Rachel and the children, hands raised. "Put it down," Gaelan said quietly. "You do not give orders here, savage," Myron shouted. Then the sheriff pushed through the crowd, gun drawn. "That is enough." Myron hesitated, then lowered the pistol. Rachel was shaking. Gaelan turned to her, hands gentle on her shoulders. "You all right?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. That night, she cooked stew and waited for him to arrive. He came after sunset, footsteps soft on the porch. "You saved us," she said. "I only stood where I needed to," he replied. She stepped closer, heart in her throat. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because I care what happens to you." Rachel reached up, touched his cheek. "I care what happens to you too." And then she kissed him soft at first, then with all the aching gratitude she had carried alone for too long. Gaelan wrapped his arms around her, steady and warm. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. A cold had settled over the land by the time the cottonwoods along the creek began to lose their leaves. The trees stood bare and reaching, like the bones of something old and still watching. Rachel moved quieter now, her steps measured, her thoughts fuller. The children were beginning to laugh again, soft and sudden like birdsong returning after silence. Jesse carved shapes into bark with a pocket knife Gaelan had given him an old piece, worn but sharpened. Josie followed Rachel from room to room, her thumb hooked in the hem of Rachel's apron like she was afraid her mother might vanish if she let go. Gaelan came most days, early enough to see the frost before it lifted. He never arrived the same way twice. Sometimes from the south path, sometimes rising out of the mesquite like he'd stepped through time. He moved with quiet purpose, and never asked for anything in return. That morning, Rachel found him in the shed, sharpening a plow blade with a whetstone. His coat was slung over a beam, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She watched from the doorway a moment before stepping inside. "You always working?" she said, voice low. He didn't look up. "Steel dulls fast in dry land." She leaned against the frame. "You fix everything around here. What do you let break?" He set the blade down, wiped his hands. "I've seen what happens when you don't hold things together." Rachel didn't answer. The silence between them was never uncomfortable. It stretched like warm fabric, not tightrope. She came closer, brushing sawdust from the edge of the bench. "Jesse asked if you ever lived in a house," she said. "I did once," Gaelan murmured. Before soldiers pushed us north. It had a fire pit sunk in the middle, and my mother kept a bowl of crushed sage near the door. Rachel studied his face. Do you miss it? He nodded. Some days I wake thinking I'm there. Then I open my eyes. She reached for his hand without thinking. His skin was calloused, warm, the kind of warm that stayed. Later that afternoon, Gaelan helped her move the goat pen closer to the barn. The old fencing had rotted halfway through and the animals were growing restless with the change in weather. As they worked, Rachel glanced toward the edge of the field. A rider was watching from a distance, too far to make out much more than the curve of a hat and the glint of a rifle. Someone's out there, she said quietly. Gaelan turned, gaze narrowing. I see him. Should I get the children inside? He shook his head. Let him watch. He'll ride off when he learns we're not afraid. And he did. Within minutes, the figure turned and disappeared into the brush. That night, Rachel sat by the stove, mending a tear in Jesse's trousers. Gaelan carved wood by the fire, shaping what looked like a bird in flight. Josie lay curled on a quilt, fast asleep. Jesse leaned against Gaelan's knee, watching the carving take shape. Will it fly? Jesse asked. Gaelan smiled faintly. In the right wind, maybe. Rachel folded the cloth in her lap. You ever think about settling somewhere again? I think about bringing something to life with my own hands. Place that's mine. Not borrowed. Not taken. She met his eyes across the firelight. You could do that here. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her, slow and steady. Only if it's not just mine. The words hung between them, a quiet invitation. The next morning, Rachel found a notice nailed to the gate. The sheriff's seal stamped in red wax. It said the property was under legal dispute, that she had 30 days to prove rightful ownership or leave. She stared at it without speaking. Gaelan read it twice, then folded it and tucked it into his coat. We'll ride to Prescott, he said. Courthouse keeps land records. I can't leave Jesse and Josie, she said. I'll take the wagon. Ride fast. Be back in 3 days. Rachel hesitated. What if they come while you're gone? He looked down at her. Then leave the lantern burning in the east window. I'll see it as I ride in. She nodded slowly. Be careful. He touched her face just once. Always. Rachel watched him leave from the porch. Jesse stood beside her, quiet. Is he coming back? Jesse asked. Yes, she said without looking away. He's the kind of man who keeps his word. 3 days passed with no trouble. On the 4th night, the wind picked up. Rachel lit the lantern in the east window anyway, just in case. She tucked the children in early, then sat on the porch wrapped in her shawl, eyes on the dark stretch of road. The stars were high when she heard hooves. Not a full gallop, but steady and close. She stood, heart pounding, and stepped into the yard. Gaelan rode into the glow of the lantern, dust on his coat, papers tied in oilskin at his side. I found it, he said, swinging down. Thomas bought the land straight, no debt. I've got the record and the judge's signature to prove it. Rachel didn't respond. She reached for his coat, pulled him close, and kissed him hard beneath the stars. Behind them, the lantern burned steady, a light that would never go unanswered again. The courthouse paper sat folded on the kitchen table, edges damp from where Rachel's hand had rested too long. A pot of beans simmered on the stove, untouched. Outside, the wind had quieted, but her thoughts hadn't. Gaelan sat across from her, coat draped on the chair back, sleeves rolled. He hadn't shaved since Prescott, and the dark growth along his jaw made him look older, harder. The judge said it plain, he said. There's no claim against this land. Rachel nodded but didn't lift her eyes. Gaelan leaned forward. You don't believe it'll stop? I believe Tate's not the kind to back down just because the law says so. Gaelan didn't argue. He reached for the tin cup in front of him but didn't drink. Rachel stood and crossed to the stove, stirring the beans once before lowering the flame. Her voice stayed quiet. When I married Thomas, I thought I was done fighting. He was steady, kept his head down. I thought that'd be enough to keep peace. Gaelan waited. I didn't expect to be hated just for standing upright. You're not hated, Rachel. She turned. Then what would you call it? They look at me like I'm something to be pushed out. And now I can take it. I never asked you to. I didn't wait for you to. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it pressed against the edges of the room. Rachel sat again, this time closer, her elbows on the table. What was it like up north? After they moved you? Gaelan's gaze drifted to the window, though the dark outside showed nothing but the lantern's reflection. Cold, wet. My sister's boy didn't make it through the first winter. We buried him in ground too frozen to dig proper. Every morning you woke up wondering what you were losing next. Rachel reached for his hand, not to comfort, but to anchor. You ever think about leaving the territory? I thought about it once. What stopped you? Didn't have a reason to stay. Not then. Her throat tightened. And now? Gaelan didn't look away. Now I do. Footsteps padded down the hall. Jesse stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hair tousled. I heard voices. Rachel stood, brushing his cheek. Just talking, sweetheart. Go on, get back into bed. I'll come tuck you in. Gaelan rose too. I'll check the barn before I go. Rachel nodded, watching him pull on his coat. The door closed soft behind him. She followed Jesse to his room and pulled the quilt up to his chin. He's not like the others, Jesse whispered. He doesn't talk loud to be heard. Rachel brushed hair from his brow. He listens different. Pays attention to the quiet. Jesse blinked slow. You trust him? She kissed his forehead. I do. She waited until his breathing evened before stepping back into the kitchen. The wind had picked up again. She reached for the lantern, turned the wick low, and sat in the doorway, pulling her shawl close. Gaelan returned 10 minutes later, boots scuffed with dry earth, hands smelling of hay. Something's wrong with the chestnut mare, he said. She's favoring her left leg. Rachel frowned. She's got a colt still nursing. I'll come by early with salve. Might be strain, might be stone bruise. They stood in the doorway, shoulder to shoulder. I want you to stay tonight. Gaelan didn't answer right away. You sure? She nodded. Not just for the mare. Then I will. She closed the door behind them, bolting it out of habit. Gaelan set his rifle near the hearth and removed his coat. Rachel poured the beans into 2 bowls, placed one in front of him. We'll need to start winter stores soon, she said. I can hunt. I can dry meat. They ate in the quiet, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock and the wind brushing the eaves. When the bowls were empty, Gaelan stood, cleared the table, rinsed the dishes in the basin without being asked. Rachel watched him. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I'm not sure, but not a man who learns to fit his hands to what's needed. He dried his hands on the cloth, then came to her. I don't need to be more than I am. I don't need you to be. She rested her head against his chest, just for a moment. The fire cracked in the hearth. Outside, no one watched the road. Inside, the house felt full in a way it hadn't in months. Gaelan slept on a pallet by the fire that night. Rachel lay in the next room, door open wide. Neither of them said good night. They didn't need to. Morning would come, and with it more work. But for now, they shared the warmth of a home being made new, not all at once, but piece by quiet piece. The first snow came early, light as sifted flour, catching on the bare branches and the fence rails Gaelan had mended with cedar slats 2 weeks before. Rachel stood at the kitchen window, her hands sunk into a bowl of flour and lard, kneading dough for biscuits. The air inside was warm and scented faintly with dried rosemary hung near the stove, but her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the sky bruised purple over the mountains. Behind her, Gaelan was crouched beside the fire, coaxing it higher with a twist of yucca fibers and pine bark. He'd brought in the kindling before dawn, his shoulders dusted white from the snowfall. Jessie sat cross-legged nearby, carving notches into a stick, while Josie laid out small stones in a line, whispering names to each one as though they were people she'd known all her life. Rachel didn't speak until she'd shaped the last biscuit. "There's a man coming tomorrow, Matthew Greeley. He's from the land office. Said he needs a witness to verify the judge's seal." Gaelan didn't look up. "You trust him?" "No, but I trust what we have in hand. If he tries to twist it, I want someone beside me who won't blink when it matters." Jessie looked up. "Is he going to try and take the farm?" Rachel wiped her hands on a cloth. "He can try, but we'll stand our ground." Josie placed her last stone. "I'll help too." Gaelan finally rose, brushing his palms against his trousers. "Then he won't find us easy to move." That night, Rachel brought out the quilt she'd started before Thomas died, a pattern of stars stitched in deep blue and pale gold, half finished and left folded at the bottom of a cedar chest for months. She spread it across the table, the needle tucked into one corner, thread still looped like a thought interrupted. Gaelan watched her lay it out. "You made that. It was meant for winter. I stopped when it no longer felt like something worth finishing. You're finishing it now." She looked at him, the weight of his words settling into her chest. "I am." He crossed the room and sat across from her. "What were you before this land?" She threaded the needle, hands steady. "Daughter of a cattle drover who died on the trail. Seamstress for a mining town while I waited for a marriage proposal that never came. Then Thomas and this place. I stitched my life together with whatever thread I could find." Gaelan nodded. "You still do." She glanced at him. "What about your father?" "He was a medicine man, not by choice. His brother died during one of the relocations, and the elders said the name passed to him. He carried it like a stone, but he never dropped it. Do you carry his name now?" "I carry his silence." Rachel's eyes lingered on him. "You speak when it matters." He didn't answer, but he reached across the table and picked up the corner of the quilt, running his thumb over the seam. The next morning dawned gray and sharp. Greeley arrived just after sunup, bundled in a brown wool coat, boots caked with fresh snow. His breath fogged the air as he dismounted, tying his horse to the post with practiced hands. Rachel met him at the gate. "I've got the paper ready." He didn't tip his hat. "I'll need to see where your husband signed and where the judge verified the claim." Gaelan stepped out of the barn just then, wiping his hands on a cloth. Greeley's eyes tracked him, narrowing. "Didn't know you were keeping company with the likes of him." Rachel didn't flinch. "He's not the one you need to worry about lying." Greeley followed her into the house, boots stomping snow onto the rug. He read the documents slowly, each page held just long enough to make her stomach tighten. Gaelan stood behind the stove, arms crossed, unmoving. When Greeley finished, he folded the papers and tapped them once on the table. "I'll file this, but I'll tell you plain, Widow Finley. There's men in this territory who don't care what a judge's mark says." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Then they'll have to reckon with me." Greeley's gaze flicked to Gaelan. "And him. I don't speak for him," she said, "but he doesn't yield for cowards." Greeley left not long after, the papers tucked into his satchel. Rachel watched him ride off until the road swallowed him. She turned toward the barn, where Gaelan had gone without a word. She found him there, kneeling beside the mare, his hand pressed lightly to her flank. "He'll stir up resentment," she said quietly. "He was always going to. You made him say it aloud." She leaned against the stall door. "I keep thinking I'll feel safe when this is over, but it never seems to settle." Gaelan stood, brushing straw from his knee. "Safety doesn't come all at once. It's layered, like a blanket. You keep adding to it, piece by piece." She stepped to him, close enough to touch the collar of his shirt. "And if I don't want to do it alone, then I'll be here." She reached up, fingers at his cheek. "Stay tonight." "I will." That night, the wind rose again, but the windows held. The children slept soundly, and in the quiet space between the ticking of the wall clock and the hush of falling snow, Rachel pressed her hand to Gaelan's chest and felt the steady rhythm beneath her palm like something she'd always known but never had words for. He didn't speak, didn't promise things that couldn't be guaranteed. He just held her, and in his stillness, she felt the weight of fear begin to lift. Not gone, but lighter, carried now, not borne alone. The spring thaw came slow, the ground softening day by day until the hard crust of winter gave way to black soil and green shoots. The creek behind the pasture ran fuller, carrying snowmelt down from the mountains, and the air held the scent of damp earth and juniper. Rachel stood at the corral gate, watching Jesse and Josie chase each other through the tall grass, their laughter lifting on the wind like something loosed from a long-held breath. She leaned her arms on the fence, eyes following the shape of Gaelan as he worked beside the shed, fitting new hinges to the door. His sleeves were rolled again, but this time not to brace against cold, just to feel the sun on his arms. He moved with the same quiet determination she'd come to know, but there was something lighter in his bearing now, as though the weight he carried had shifted in its place. Josie tripped in the grass and Rachel called her name, already stepping forward, but Gaelan had reached her first, scooping the girl up with one arm and brushing the hair back from her face. Josie giggled, her arms looped around his neck. Jesse ran up behind them, tugging at Gaelan's vest and pointing toward the tree line, asking if they could check the traps later. Gaelan nodded, listened without rushing, and Rachel felt a warmth rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. That night, after the children were asleep, she found him sitting on the porch, boots resting on the step, knife in hand as he whittled the last edge of a small wooden horse. Its legs were sturdy, the mane etched with care. She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "He's going to keep that for years," she said. "He asked for one with strong legs," he replied. "Said it needed to outrun anything." Rachel smiled. "He still sleeps with that feather you gave him, you know? Tucks it under his pillow like a charm." Gaelan looked over at her. "He's got your fight, but it's gentled." She watched the last curl of wood fall away beneath his blade. "You never asked for this." He set the carving aside. "I didn't expect it, but I'd choose it again." Rachel turned to face him fully. "When I lost Thomas, I thought that was the end of who I could be. I'd built the whole of my life around one shape, and when it was gone, I didn't know how to stand without it. You found another way." "I did, but not alone." He reached for her hand, his touch sure. "I don't want to be apart from this. Not the land, not the work, not you." Rachel's breath caught. "Then stay, as more than a help, as part of this house." Gaelan didn't hesitate. "I already am." They married at the edge of summer, beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. The preacher from a neighboring town came out with a dusty Bible and a worn smile, and the neighbors who once watched from a distance now stood with hands folded and faces softened by time. Greeley never returned. Tate's store closed after a fire gutted its back wall. No one asked questions. Rachel wore a pale blue dress with a hem she'd restitched 3 times to get just right. Gaelan wore a shirt Jessie had chosen, the collar slightly crooked but clean. Josie carried wildflowers, and Jessie stood at Gaelan's side, chin high. "I never thought I'd see a day like this again," Rachel whispered, fingers laced through Gaelan's. "You were meant to." They built a second room on the house that fall, not out of necessity but because Rachel wanted a space for sewing and Gaelan wanted to give it to her. The goats multiplied. The mare healed. Josie began learning to write her name in the dirt, and Jessie learned to read by firelight, sounding out words with his fingers in his hair, the same way Thomas once had. Some nights, Rachel sat at the window with a cup of chicory, watching the sky deepen over the hills. Gaelan would come in from the yard, smelling of cedar and smoke, and rest his hand at the small of her back. They spoke little in those moments. They didn't need to. Every piece of their life had been hard-earned. Not perfect, but real. Forged in silence, in work, in the shared weight of what had been lost and what had been built in its place. And when winter returned, they faced it together, hand in hand, warm beneath a quilt stitched through with stars.